Guys, it's Emily, and today I'm here to bring you my third mystery history talk in honor of March Mystery Madness. Today's talk is based on the murder of Mary Rogers and the short story that Edgar Allan Poe wrote based on the murder, which was The Mystery of Marie Roget. And this talk is based on The Beautiful Cigar Girl by Daniel Stashower. Mary Rogers was a very attractive woman who, for a period of time, worked at John Anderson's Cigar Emporium in New York City in the 1830s, and she was very well known in her part of the city because she was so pretty that a lot of men came into the cigar shop to admire her, including some famous writers like Washington Irving and Fenimore Cooper. She worked at the shop for about 3 years, but at the time of her murder, she was actually working at her mother's boarding house because her mom needed some help. And then while she was working at the boarding house, she had met two gentlemen, Daniel Payne and Alfred Cromwell, and she eventually became engaged to Daniel Payne, despite the fact that her mother disapproved and really wanted her to choose Alfred Cromwell because he had a better job and a better temperament. The mysteries of Mary's life actually started in 1838, 3 years before her murder. She disappeared for a short period of time while she was still working at the cigar shop, and her disappearance made the local papers, and there were reports that her mother had found a suicide note written by her. However, eventually she came back home, and then after that she came back to work at the cigar shop, and nobody really ever heard why she disappeared that first time. There were a lot of rumors and whatnot. And then, 3 years later, on July 25th, 1841, Mary told Daniel Payne that she was going to visit her aunt, who lived somewhere else in New York City, and they agreed that he would come meet her at the trolley stop later that night and walk her home. However, that night there was a terrible thunderstorm, and Daniel just assumed that Mary was going to be staying the night at her aunt's because of the weather, so he didn't even go to the trolley. The next day, she didn't come back, and so Daniel decided to go down to her aunt's to see if she was still there, and he found out when he was there that she had never been there, and that her aunt had never known, like there had been no discussion of her coming to visit. So Daniel and Alfred Cromwell immediately began searching for her, putting notices in the paper, and they alerted the police. Her body was found floating in the Hudson River near Hoboken, New Jersey on July 28, 1841, and it was immediately apparent that she had been strangled to death. Her throat, there was a strip of her petticoat tied very tightly around her neck, and it was tied so tightly that at first the coroner didn't even notice it was there. So initially the Hoboken coroner did the autopsy, but then there was sort of a debate under whether it fell under Hoboken jurisdiction or New York City's jurisdiction, and eventually, after a few days, New York City took it on under its jurisdiction, and her body was taken there, and a second autopsy was performed, but there had been a lot of deterioration of the body by then because it was summer, and they didn't really have freezers back then or anything to preserve the body. So her murder was initially a newspaper sensation because it gave newspaper editors the chance to decry the New York police force as corrupt and incompetent, because that was a widespread concern at the time. The police were known for taking bribes, and the first theory that came out after she died was that she had been kidnapped by a gang on her way to her aunt's. And so at this time, gangs were a big problem, and it was known that police would take bribes from them and not report them or arrest them for doing bad things. And her death eventually did lead to the Police Reform Act of 1845, which greatly increased the New York City Police Department, and also there was the system where if you brought back lost stuff, they would give you money for it, and that was causing an issue where people were scheming to have their stuff be stolen in order to get the money. But after the initial press of her case, it sort of lost steam because they didn't really have anybody they could arrest. They questioned a lot of people, including Daniel Payne and Alfred Cromwell, but they never formally charged anybody. And about the same time, Edgar Allan Poe was developing a new type of story that was the detective story that used deductive reasoning, which he called rationation. And his detective, C. Augustus Dupin, was a precursor to Sherlock Holmes, and he appeared to be able to read people's minds, but he was really reading clues based on their body language and his view of psychology and things like that. Poe's first story with Dupin was The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was a great success, and Edgar Allan Poe was always perpetually broke, so he was keen to recreate the magic. So about a year after Mary's murder, he decided he was going to have Dupin solve the case by only using newspaper reports, and he transferred the murder to Paris, and it was called The Mystery of Mary Roget, and it was supposed to be a 3-part tale. The first 2 parts came out in The Lady's Home Companion in November and December 1842. However, just before the 3rd part was to be released, which had Dupin's reveal of the murderer, the real-life case had a breakthrough. Tavern owner in Hoboken, Frederica Lost, came forward and told police that Mary Rogers had died of an abortion that had taken place in her home. And this reveal caused the press to take up the story again, and this time they spoke out against a prominent local abortionist named Madame Restell, and it was also severely hurt Poe's story, of course, and he had to get an extension from his editor and make heavy edits to his story because he had already started laying out this complex theory that no longer worked. The 3rd part appeared in February of 1843 in Lady's Home Companion, and Dupin doesn't actually reveal who the murderer is. There's an editor's note that says he solved the case, but that the truth was too scandalous to reveal what happened. And Mary Roget is still considered important because it was the first detective story that was based on a real-life crime, so that was really cool. It also did influence public opinion about the case because Poe systematically showed that the game theory that had been popular right after her death had happened couldn't be true based on available evidence. Mary was found with a sort of hitch on the back of her dress, like somebody had been pulling her, and then later, they had found the scene of the murder, and there were drag marks, and there were some clothes lying around, and there was a broken fence post where it sort of looked like they had pulled her over the fence post. And of course, a gang could have just carried her around, and they also would have, picked up her clothes and made sure there was no evidence because they would have had the experience to know that versus one person who maybe murdered her in a crime of passion and didn't know so much about how you cover up your tracks. So despite the abortion theory gaining evidence, Mary's murder was never truly solved because the abortion didn't solve the strangulation unless it was her neck was covered up by this cord, unless there was an attempt to cover up that she had died of an abortion by making it look like she had died some other way. Her fiancé, Daniel Payne, committed suicide in October 41, leaving a note that implied that he might have been involved. John Anderson, the cigar emporium owner that, of course, made Mary famous, was under suspicion for the rest of his life, and he made a few comments to various friends at the end of his life that sort of implied that he might have been involved. A lot of people believed that her disappearance of 1838 was somehow connected to the murder in 1841, that she had had some kind of previous abortion, or that she had been preparing to elope with someone, who then later came back and murdered her. There was even a crazy theory floating around that Poe himself might have had something to do with the murder because he knew the details so well. Poe only lived 6 more years after the final part of Marie Roget was published. He died in October of 1849 at age 40. Marie Roget is considered the weakest of his 3 Dupin stories, but again, it did heavily influence people like Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie, so it did have a huge impact later on. Noted in the book that Mary Rogers was, well known and talked about a lot during the time of her murder, whereas Poe was sort of an obscure magazine editor who longed for fame. And of course nowadays, not a lot of people know who Mary Rogers are. Well, Poe is, worldwide, famous worldwide. And of course, Dupin is known as one of the precursors to the early detective novels. But of course, you have to debate whether Mary Rogers is really forgotten when there's been books written about her, including this one. So yeah, I really enjoyed learning more about Mary Rogers and Edgar Allan Poe. This book contains a lot of good biographical information about Poe as well, if you're interested in that. Daniel Stashower is a great true crime fiction writer. No, true crime non-fiction writer, I should say. And I highly recommend this book if you're interested. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope everybody's having a great March Mystery Madness, and I'll talk to you again later. Bye!